Good morning, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us this morning's live panel discussion from the Data Centres Act, which forms part of the Data Centres Ireland Virtual Festival. My name is Hugh Robinson and I'm the Exhibition Director for Data Centres Ireland, which unfortunately cannot physically be held this year due to the pandemic. However, it will take place next year on the 16th and 17th of November 2021 at the RDS in Dublin. The Data Centres Ireland Virtual Festival consists of live panel discussions, 2 per day over the course of this week, featuring industry leaders and experts discussing key areas affecting data centres both in Ireland and internationally. As well as live panel discussions, the festival also has a range of on-demand content which can be accessed through the Data Centres Ireland website. This morning's webinar discusses issues related to connectivity and fibre from a perspective of Ireland linked to the world, connectivity across Ireland and regional development. If you would like to ask any questions, please put them in the chat box and they shall be addressed during the discussion. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to Data Centres Ireland website as additional on-demand content. The moderator for this morning's panel discussion is Fergus Innes, Senior Vice President of Crosslake Fibre. So without further ado, let me hand you over to Fergus. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh, and good morning, everybody, to this morning's session on Data Centre Ireland related to connectivity and fibre. I think, albeit our preference for these events is to do it in person, I think it's testament to infrastructure from a fibre connectivity perspective, as well as the ecosystem surrounding that we're able to have such clarity to be able to deliver these types of events and still continue with some type of normality through the current situation. So thanks again, Hugh. I'd like to welcome the panelists today, Nigel Bailiff from Aquacomms, Paul Besley and Peter Hendricks. I'll let the guys introduce themselves in a second, and also the companies that they represent. And then we'll jump into some interesting conversation around connectivity on the island of Ireland, why Ireland is critical and has presented itself as such a key location in the general ecosystem of international connectivity, as well as a real trajectory of growth in the data center and hyper growth of core compute facilities in the European ecosystem. So Nigel, maybe if I could pass over to you, would you like to give a brief introduction?
Yeah, thanks, Fergus. Thanks very much for inviting us. Great to be at Data Centres Ireland, albeit virtually, which is as we've done most of the things this year. Aquacomms is an Irish headquartered company which delivers subsea cable capacity on an infrastructure as a service basis. So we sit in the layer delivering service to carriers and large users of what we would call industrial bandwidth across oceans. We focus totally on that area. Focus is actually our brand strapline, fibre optic cables undersea. So nice and neat, very clear to understand what we do. We build these cables, huge capital projects, hundreds of millions of dollars to cross the Atlantic. We then operate them for a 20-25 year period and provide varying levels of services to the different parts of the industry. I mean, it's a fairly unknown area in general telecommunications. It's fairly specialist, but of course, like everything else, it has these enormous, hockey stick growth curves based around the adoption of the internet and the adoption of, connectivity to make data centers work together collaboratively across continents, cultures, and between countries. We've a couple of cables. We've a couple of existing cables. One which goes all the way to Long Island in New York, which was installed in 2015. We then cut back over to the UK and pick up some of the cable traffic from the UK and from London. And we have a couple of cables expecting to land in Ireland next year. One on the east and one on the west. We've just effectively gone live with a cable, the trunk of a cable from New Jersey to Denmark. That's 7,500 kilometers across the Atlantic Ocean, 2.5 years or so to build that. And that will start to pin together the Nordic economies, Ireland as a hub for connectivity into Europe, back through into the mainland via the UK and directly, and then connecting that to the eastern seaboard. So that's really where we sit in this ecosystem. We work very closely with terrestrial and on-land connectivities and with data center partners.
Excellent, Nigel. Thanks for that, and we'll look forward to kind of jumping into a little bit more conversation in terms of some of those systems and historically why Ireland has played such a crucial part in terms of transatlantic connectivity. Mr. Besley, would you like to do a quick introduction?
Thank you, Fergus, and thanks again for letting me take part in Data Centers Ireland and giving me an excuse to wear a work shirt for about the first time since March. I'm announced here as General Manager of Prescient Data Centers. The advertising for that came out slightly sooner than we could get the website and collateral upgraded, so you heard it here first. We're better known as Five Nines. We've been operating as Five Nines for a couple of years now, since we built Northern Ireland's first ever large-scale commercial carrier-neutral data center. And importantly for this discussion, we chose the location. It sits up on the northwest coast of Northern Ireland, sitting directly on the landing station of the old Hibernia and now GTT, Project Kelvin, GTT North, low latency transatlantic cable. So we're directly connected to a transatlantic cable system, which then goes out across the Southport down into London. So we've got great direct connectivity through to UK mainland, and it whizzes down through Belfast and down into Dublin, where it picks up with other cable systems from the Republic of Ireland. So we're a very well-connected data center facility, which is important to us because being located in Northern Ireland, we'll rely on international business looking to take a footprint on the island of Ireland. Post-Brexit, that gives us quite an interesting perspective because we are a UK data center sat closer to North America than other parts of the UK. And we're sitting directly on the EU border with very low latency connectivity for people that want to do DR or to some good backup systems, synchronous backup. We're a co-location provider using the natural resource of Northern Ireland's low temperatures to keep cooling costs low and generally a very high quality facility. So anyway, thank you. I look forward to taking part in the rest of the discussion.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for that. Peter, would you mind giving a brief introduction? Thank you.
I will indeed. Thanks, Fergus, and I'm delighted to be here this morning. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of National Broadband Ireland. We were awarded the contract with the Irish government for delivering the fibre network, building it and operating it under the National Broadband Plan. I'll give you a short background in terms of the National Broadband Plan. The objective of the National Broadband Plan was to deliver high-speed broadband to premises that had less than 30 megabits per second. And that equated to about 544,000 premises across the country. And our goal there is to deliver a network that's future-proofed. So obviously, when we looked at all of the technology solutions during a 4 to 5 year tender process, fibre ultimately seemed to be the technology that was going to deliver the future demand and bandwidth requirements. And not only that, but any new premises that are built in terms of being able to scale up to deliver bandwidth and connectivity to additional premises over a 25-year period. So when we looked at launching this network, we were talking about launching with 150 megabits per second. We are going to start launching, we're starting to connect homes in the weeks between now and Christmas and then beyond with 500 megabits per second as the minimum speed. So that's across the entire country. So the actual network we're building in Ireland covers about 96% of the land mass of Ireland. So we talk about the intervention areas as it's defined are those premises that have less than 30 megabits per second. They're everywhere. And it's not just rural. There are also premises within urban and town centres that will not be and have not been served by commercial operators. So we're building that fibre network. It'll be approximately 144,000 kilometres of fibre. So quite a significant infrastructure, probably the biggest infrastructure programme since rural electrification. Today we have 800 people employed in the project, and that'll scale up to 1,800 people over the course of the next 15 months. And we look forward to connecting homes and showing that the demand and utilization of fibre certainly will be proven in the weeks and months ahead. So I look forward to having a further discussion this morning with the rest of the panelists.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks for joining today. As obviously, it's been an interesting ride seeing the development of where we've got to during the plan, and excited to see how the rollout continues. And we'll jump into some questions specifically on that. Just in terms of questions and to the audience, we want to try and keep today's session as interactive as we can, and open from a conversational perspective. All the panelists are quite happy to be very transparent in answering questions that come to us. So what we would like, if possible, if you do have a question, please tap it into the comments section. Hugh will actually take the question, raise his hand, and come in and ask live the question, and we'll look to obviously provide a specific answer using the expertise of the panel for the questions that come in. So please don't hesitate to put your hand up and ask a question. Just to kick off, and I think listening to you guys do the introductions, we really do have a great panel covering the island of Ireland from a connectivity perspective. We saw obviously in the news yesterday that Project Stratum had been signed by Fibre, really delivering a similar type of solution, I believe, to the National Broadband Plan. I suppose, Peter, just first question to you, and you mentioned it in your introduction. Obviously, the plan is to really deliver world-class communication, which is obviously critical and never more so than in today's environment, in providing people with the right infrastructure to have a hybrid work-life balance. In terms of general connectivity on the island of Ireland, do you see that the fibre, and you mentioned 144,000 kilometres of fibre, do you see that fibre as providing regional opportunities to extend data center facilities outside of the kind of cluster of Dublin into a more regionalized spread of facilities?
I do, and I suppose we obviously are. It's very clear what's required for a data center. One is obviously space. Is there a footprint where you can build a data center? Two, in terms of power, but the most critical part really is connectivity. And if you don't have diverse connectivity into a data center, really it's going to be very challenging selling space in a data center. And I think some of the bigger tech companies certainly have the financial backing to build data centers where there isn't connectivity today, because they can afford to build in that infrastructure if it's not available. I think under the National Broadband Plan, the infrastructure we're building is built for the future. It is built for supporting businesses, farms, residential, consumer connections, but also any sort of demand we're talking about in terms of whether it's infrastructure related to do with the telecoms industry, mobile networks, fixed networks. We're certainly building enough scale in this network from a physical perspective in terms of the number of cables in the network will far outperform what's needed in the short to medium term. And when you think about the cost of building a network, increasing the number of cables you have isn't significant, right? It's the cost of putting the cable up. It's the cost of we're deploying on 1.5 million poles around the country, of which we're probably installing 200,000 poles, new poles, and we'll be delivering a significant amount of underground network. So when you add all that together, the cost of building the network in terms of the volume is significant. It's not that big of a deal in terms of adding the capacity to support future-proof services, and we've done that. And the benefit, I suppose, of the National Broadband Network, because we're covering 96% of the landmass of Ireland, we're also building diverse routes around the network so we can offer high availability. So our network is built not just with capacity in mind, but the highest availability in mind. So I do believe there's an opportunity for regional and rural data center opportunities going forward. There's no doubt about
Yeah, I think they're going to be needed. They're going to be needed as well, aren't they? Because of the the edge strategies of 5G. You won't send all of the 10 or 20 gigabits that comes off every Tesla car that goes past a 5G network node all the way back to Santa Clara. You'll compute some of it locally. You'll compute some of it even regionally. You'll do some of it nationally. Some of it won't be allowed to leave the nation, and some of it will. So there's a kind of a whole mix of stuff, isn't there, really, in where data centers, what we think of as data centers, are going to end up.
Yeah, and I think probably the network layer now is if we look at what's happening in the fixed network layer, everything is going wholesale. I mean, we're all effectively here wholesalers. We're offering services to providers who sell on to businesses and consumers. So our networks need to be able to support multiple applications and services. And we know that probably the service providers of the future are not just going to be traditional telcos. So I think whether it's connected car applications, whether it's security services for our guards, there's going to be services that are going to be delivered in this network that have endpoints that are either close to where the connection is or further away. And if I look at our network structure, typically in the past, when you think about an old telephone network, in Ireland, there was over 1,200 exchanges. And it was the electrical signal distance between the exchange and the end telephone. And that's constrained broadband for, the last 20 years. And we've all tried to stretch the physics of delivering broadband. With fibre, we're now building it that we've 227 co-location facilities. But each of those co-location facilities effectively could be equally deliver edge-based computing opportunities. And I look at Vodafone had an announcement out where they're trialing open RAN technologies. Once you start moving away from proprietary systems and proprietary hardwares and proprietary networks, I think open access wholesale infrastructure is going to evolve where the end user and the end business gets the best benefit. And probably where we saw this most a couple of years ago was when we delivered fibre broadband to businesses around Ireland under the MANS, the ENET Metropolitan Area Network program. And what you see is businesses that traditionally had hardware in terms of in their data center or in a retail store now can buy an application. There's no need for engineers to come to site. They get an application and service turned up within an hour. They get online training, and they can sell services much faster and innovate much faster than they could have in the past. So I think certainly the opportunities are significant.
Yeah, we're actually doing a bit of that in one of our portfolio companies owned by the fund that owns the majority of Aquacoms in the UK is doing as you say, a neutral host, neutral RAN solution in and around a lot of major cities. And it's really interesting how that's changing the dynamic, because the cell size of 5G and the fact that it doesn't penetrate particularly well inside most buildings, you have to do something in building as well, means that the whole structure of how mobile communications is happening is trending towards this neutral approach. And they share the same characteristics that we do of carrier neutrality. We're operating an infrastructure for the benefit of the whole. And then it's just layered on by the services that people can accept. And even, I think, in different examples of deploying even rural fibre, the layering of services is immense. I mean, you can do almost everything through the same infrastructure. So that diversity angle you mentioned is really important.
We've just recently been involved in a project, and just going back a little bit, Northern Ireland has, until fairly recently, been served by, nationally anyway, really by BT, Virgin Media and Air. And it was quite an important breakup when BT properly separated from Openreach and did become two separate companies. So Openreach now provides open access services. So a project that we were involved in recently was for an organisation moving from UK mainland, putting a workforce out in Northern Ireland, wanted to move data centre services out to support it, but it wasn't really a data center deal. It was a connectivity deal. This was about embedding SIMs in small devices, really in preparation for a whole lot of Internet of Things devices. So it was a connectivity option. They needed to be connecting to 40 or 50 managed network operators, cloud platforms, and that just doesn't exist or didn't exist in Northern Ireland. But having this open access structure and things like OpenReach, things like Fibre coming into Northern Ireland means that suddenly the other carriers can access these networks, and we can start to build more of a community on that.
You know, I think it's interesting as we talk about it, and definitely, you know, new infrastructure going in. It is critical infrastructure. Nigel, probably, obviously, with the work that you've done with a lot of multinationals, US multinationals specifically, do you think that's changed the perception of the infrastructure that's available and the cost points associated to infrastructure on the island of Ireland, based on, you know, the progression that's been made to date and continues to be made in terms of investment and more diverse options available?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you know, Ireland, as you said in the uptake, you know, has always been at this kind of forefront, and you go right the way back to Valentia Island and 1858, which, you know, it's not true. I was not part of the 1858 cable project, but I've done a lot of things on the Atlantic. But in 1858, they landed the first cable across the Atlantic. It came into Ireland because of its physical position. So I think because of a range of different reasons, there are some really large companies that we all know about that have decided to make Ireland one of their homes in Europe, and a very sort of key one, because it's nearer in terms of physical terms to the east coast of the US. It has all of the good attributes that people need and expect to be a good hub for their data and their compute activity. And I think, you know, we see Ireland, for example, has more of the new era cables landing than any other country in Europe. So, you know, Denmark's essentially got one. Ireland's got three in terms of GTT Express, and the one that we have and the one that we'll bring next year. That's three modern era, you know, 100 plus terabit cables, 200 plus terabit cables that can start to anchor, you know, the next phase of deployment. France has got a couple, the UK's got two, and Spain's got one at the moment. So, you know, that still is showing a forefront position for Ireland. But there's some challenges, and I think those folk would talk quite openly about there being backhaul challenges in Ireland. I'm sure the NBN work is going to add another layer to that in terms of connectivity from the west coast and from the south, where the cables land up to Dublin metropolitan area. There's some very good network that's solid, you know, and just a trunk network, we might call in old parlance. You know, it goes from the landing zones pretty much straight to the city. And there's some fairly good, you know, let's call it kind of medium range stuff, which goes, it's based on old infrastructure. But the challenge of adding a third and a fourth is quite high, I think, and that's quite high anywhere in Europe. It's not that any one area of Europe is better than any other. It's just always going to be a challenge to create the mix that they want to see, four or five separate routes into their main hub sites. But that's creating an accretion. You know, the number of people who bring their data and their workforce to Ireland, because there are some of these very, very large named companies with huge deployments here over 40 years even. I think Apple passed 40 years in Cork just this week even. So, you know, there's a real strong center of gravity or you know, pull effect, and that's why I think you can see Ireland being a location for these kind of connectivity projects. But there's some challenges with that, because there's legislation, there's projects going on in Ireland, even the project to add wind farms as much as possible to the Irish coastline. I think Holland found that when they created these enormous swathes of wind farm locations just off the coast, they actually sterilize areas of the coastline for the development of cables, because the wind farms and the cables don't actually mix particularly well. So, you know, that needs to be, there's a marine spatial planning exercise that needs to be handled with caution in Ireland, and there's a consultation out about that now from the various ministries. So that's good. But, you know, a country like Ireland needs to, at the very least, make it a level playing field with other areas of Europe around infrastructure development and deployment, because the speed of growth of the connectivity requirements and the speed with which some of these really large organizations work means they can't afford a delay caused by either legislation lag or simply the complexity of the process of obtaining permits. If it's easier somewhere else, then there's a chance that some of that development activity goes to another place, because the roller coaster of cable deployments will not stop. It will just continue. So there's a it's in the balance, I would say, at the moment with Ireland. Now, that's a great advantage for Ireland, but could also be I think we probably look at somewhere like Holland and say their decision to stop data center deployment for a short period kind of really has an ongoing effect there now around people's insecurity about plunging enormous amounts of capital into that location, and we just have to hope that isn't the case for Ireland.
I think probably the audience are thinking, but why are these international subsea cable systems important? I think it's I think it's important to continuously illustrate that international connectivity. Whenever you're making a phone call, but liking something on Facebook, whatever it may be, all international communications, or 99%, go over subsea systems. And that's the criticality of the nature of the business. And if we don't continue to help and harness connectivity onto the island of Ireland, then we've become an island within the region.
I think you're right.
Is there anything in terms of... We've
kept a secret of this part of the industry for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't really be a worry to the average person in the street picking up their phone and wanting to make a FaceTime call or whatever they want to do, or even a format like this. I mean, I'm in the UK. I'm in Hampshire in the UK, and we're connected because of a submarine cable, or rather a series of submarine cables that connect the UK to Ireland. Without that, we wouldn't be, because satellite really does, even with the low Earth orbit stuff, you may be crawling into a 2 or 3% volume activity. And I think people don't quite understand how few of these there are. There are probably only 6 what I would call high grade new era cables between the Europe and North America. So built in the last 5 years or so, which is the kind of new era of cable building. And certainly, that's going to increase to 6 or 8 or 10. But people get the impression that once it leaves their handset and it goes into, a mast somewhere, they don't need to have to worry about it. But there is a huge, activity even on land as well as in these submarine cable elements. And they're not necessarily straightforward projects. The sea is the sea at the end of the day, and it's a complex thing to build into and to deliver. And so I think there's also probably less innovation than people might think. We are really using the same techniques to lay cables on the seabed as were used in the 1850s and 1860s. The ships are a lot better. The burial techniques on shallow water are a lot better. And why burial? Well, because the sharing of the seabed with a number of other users, trawler fishermen, ships anchoring, means that they're effectively potentials for the cables to get snagged and cause faults. So we bury them under the bottom of the sea. Now that's improved over the last even 20 years, but again, huge industrial sized industries to try and make this quicker and easier, but ostensibly it's still the same process as it was 150 years ago. And it takes a long time. From standing start, even if you had $200 million in your hand today, you would only really be putting a cable live in about 3 years.
I think to interrupt. We've got a couple of questions. Some are a bit specific. I'll try and read them out. Stephen Boyd sort of said, with aging subsea cables like Cirrus North and the other positioners half in, half out on Brexit, are there any expectations on new subsea routes out of Belfast?
I've not seen any evidence of it. Looking at Aqua's work, Bulk, etc. People seem to be focusing on the EU and focusing on Ireland, and Ireland meaning the Republic of Ireland. The North has been missed, which I think is a shame, because post-Brexit, I think to come in on and use some of the existing infrastructure from the north of Ireland and take it down through the south into Dublin is perhaps missing a trick. I think Northern Ireland, although we do have transatlantic connectivity, as Nigel pointed out, it's a relatively aging piece of infrastructure now. It's probably 10 years old, so it works perfectly well, but it's not part of the new era. So seeing things like the Fibre announcement and bringing on island broadband is fantastic, because it's giving the ability for people to be working from home, which COVID has made a necessity now. That's driving improvements in IT to support that. It's encouraging new business to come and develop a digital skills sector in Northern Ireland. So having the within Northern Ireland infrastructure now getting very good, I think we're going to need some more investment in transatlantic infrastructure and subsea connectivity through to mainland UK.
There is actually, I mean, a lot of these things get developed in sort of not necessarily in secret, but not being particularly public. And I'm aware of at least one of the main operators who builds, UK to the north of the island of Ireland, looking at replacing some of its technology. I mean, the unrepeated technology, which is used on the shorter distance cables, is lasts a relatively longer period of time and has less inefficiencies, if you like, built into its structure when it's laid. So they will last quite a considerable time longer. And I think there's quite a bit being planned around, Scotland wanting to obtain connectivity to places independent of England. But I think you're you're right to call it out, that actually people need to think about the longevity of these. These don't last for 100 years. They last a typical repeated cable system across the Atlantic will last for 20 to 25 years. There was a huge building surge in 1999, 2001 around, if you will, we all remember the dot-com boom, and then the bust, and then a kind of a recycling of all those assets around, and some activities done to improve their performance by adding equipment on the ends. But ostensibly, they're coming towards the end of their life period. If you look at it in 5-year increments, there's even a question in there about TAP 14. Will it go out of service? TAP 14 goes out of service in less than a month. TAP 14 will turn off in December the 15th, as we understand from that consortium. Now, that's a cable that's been in the water for 22 years, I think. So you will see this kind of recycling of older into newer infrastructure. And it's important to remember the connectivity back, say, to the UK, or maybe down towards France, and then also upwards towards the Nordics. And some of those are in plan, and some of those are actually in kind of manufacturing and production. But all of the parts have to work for this global communications, mesh to work.
I'd agree totally with that. And I suppose if you think about the collaboration here, businesses and industries can't do it on their own. And I think where they invest, where their financial backers want to invest money, is where they know things are going, where they have certainty and the risk is minimized. I can only imagine the transatlantic cables, the challenges and risks that lie with that compared to building on land network. But governments and the support that they give, not just at a policy level, but on the ground in terms of local authorities and getting access to road opening licenses where you're putting up poles. All of that planning activity needs to be joined up with a long-term vision, long-term view, because I think the wave of demand is certainly clear. Years ago you could say, okay, it's going to take 6-7 years to do something, and whether that's a data center or a project. Now I think the demand is actually caught up. I mean, to go from a home connection of 30 megabits to 500 megabits today, and the applications coming heavily on top of that, and the actual utilization coming heavily on top, we need to be thinking longer term. And governments are supporting it, but on the ground, all of the planning that goes around the local activities need to be aligned with the government policy. And that way, I think you'll get, financial investors in behind these programs. And Ireland can lead here. And I think certainly the government are behind that in their digital agenda in terms of across multiple departments. And once we get that joined up thinking and all these big infrastructure projects come together, I think we can lead in Europe in terms of connectivity and infrastructure that supports applications and services such as major data centers across the country. But I think when I look at, and we've all had issues in terms of services previously in a business that I was involved with as a shareholder, we had connectivity to Europe. And you think because you have two routes on subsea fibre, you think it's no risk. One out of Wexford, one out of Dublin. And it's not until both of them go down, you realise how fragile it is. And therefore the long-term investment in aqua fibre is critical. And you're not aware of it until it impacts you. And the repair time is significant as well. So I think long-term support for investment is critical.
You're right. The worst one for me, Peter, is I used to run a network that went in and out of Hong Kong. I ran the flag network globally for several years, and we had 14 cables all cut in the same event, which isolated Hong Kong for the best part of a month, right? So never say never in the world of the sea. I think that's something that's often forgotten, that if it can happen, even if it is really, really remotely unlikely, then it probably will.
I think it's not just a challenge for Ireland. I mean, we see it ourselves in terms of we're physically building a new cable between Slough and the UK across the English Channel to Paris. I mean, the English Channel has not been built on for almost 20 years. So these are challenges on some of the geographic locations that you would have thought would have had a longer term policy or plan in place. So, but I think to your point, Peter, it's critical that we continue to think about this from a private enterprise perspective, but also from a government support. And back 20 years ago, and Peter, you kind of referenced it, government support in terms of international capacity and helping drive the initiative to bring more carriers into the Irish market to obviously build a more competitive environment and build better infrastructure was definitely a wise thought at that time. Do you think, I suppose on both sides, on the subsea and also on the terrestrial side, a couple of questions, are we using all the infrastructure, the state asset infrastructure like railways and road infrastructure to assist with the rollout of the fibre infrastructure that you're planning to put in place? And I suppose from a subsea perspective, are we doing or is government doing everything that they can in terms of really smoothing the path in terms of landing new cable systems onto the island of Ireland? Maybe Peter, you want to kind of address the first piece?
Yeah, I think there's probably a number of what we call passive infrastructure that's available to us, and typically you're talking about poles and ducts and the railway line. So the traditional ones are being utilised, but there's a broader context in looking at all infrastructure that's available. Some is easier to some. I suppose they look at it from a commercialization perspective. They've got typical utilities or businesses to run that consume a lot of their time and energy. So telecoms almost becomes a side project and doesn't get the attention and focus. But I think that's because telecoms almost is seen as a separate utility, a separate network with no connection with any other utility. I think that's changing now. I think all passive infrastructure, and certainly under the EU Commission's digital agenda program, the objective under the state aid rules is to use existing infrastructure where available. And so from our program perspective, yes, it's easier to use the old traditional infrastructure because there's processes and regulatory framework set up to utilize that, and it's all about getting built today. But we're also looking at areas where we can leverage existing infrastructures, and we're talking to the LGMA and the RMO. So we're engaging at a local and a national government level to ensure that infrastructure can be utilized, and we look at mechanisms where we can benefit from using it. The processes around getting access to it are what we say easily navigated. Because when we're deploying, obviously we're building in every single county in 2021, and we'll have 1,800 people working on the ground building this network. It needs to be contiguous. We can't do a stop-start. There's too many people involved in the program. So we're at the moment at a national level, we're agreeing all of those policies and procedures, and there's significant willingness. I think what the one step the government made here a number of years ago was to set up the TAG group, the telecoms group, across each of the county councils, and to assign broadband officers. And that's not just for the National Broadband Plan. It's also about mobile coverage as well. So they put together a national framework where they could help solve problems, whether it's planning issues, whether it's access to infrastructure. And I think that has certainly helped. And I think the National Broadband Plan probably is a project of significant scale where it's got everybody talking. And we're doing briefings. We've briefed 16 county councils, and we're doing monthly briefings with the broadband officers in the TAG group, where we have all the county councils together. And it's important that everybody's communicating. It's probably been the biggest risk of any infrastructure project, ironically, particularly telecoms, communication. If we're not all talking and understand the goal, that we'll never get there. So I think that government have a significant role in this, and I welcome their commitment to the National Broadband Plan, but it goes beyond that. It is about the data center infrastructure. It is about subsea cables. It is about connecting us to the US and Europe. It's critical.
So Nigel, I'll ask the subsea question to you, and then Hugh, we'll open up. I see a couple of questions coming in, so we'll pivot to those after Nigel's just answered on the subsea piece.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, not as coordinated, if I'm honest. And we're trying very hard and working very diligently with the government and the representatives on looking at this very issue. There's a European Submarine Cables Association. There's ICPC. There's a number of industry bodies that, for a long time, has talked about how countries can make it more straightforward. A process. Now, not necessarily making it easier. That's not the point. It's there are quite obviously within legislations of various countries the requirements to do various things in order to get permission to bring a cable on shore, which is a fairly benign activity. Once the cable is buried under the seabed, it really isn't particularly bothering or infecting anybody. There's been years and years and years of studies on the environment, on the wildlife, the flora, etc. And even on, interaction with fishing. We've obviously existed with, deep trawling fishermen for decades. So the specific situation, I think, I've delivered cables in nearly 55 countries in the world. I will say Ireland is almost the hardest. It's probably, in that group of very difficult countries that has a very involved and long drawn out process with an enormous amount of documentation and information needing to be generated. That's okay. When you know that, our projects take a relatively long period of time. It takes a long time to make, 7,000 kilometers of cable. It's something that you can do in a couple of months. So that's all okay. It's more about the certainty and approach of the process, and we've done a lot of work with the various units in Ireland. But the primary legislation is from 1933, so the primary legislation that defines how things will be assessed is almost it's kind of approaching 100 years old. There was a refresh of it maybe 10-15 years ago, but it was really to pick up a couple of additional groups of people who might want to be bringing things into the foreshore. So this marine spatial planning is very important. We're very keen and happy to see and work with the government on how we can make that a level playing field for everybody. But I will say other countries in Europe take a completely different approach to this, and I would say are looking to encourage or almost predefine how easy it will be to deliver a cable into that country. And those will be the countries that maybe don't have so many now, but want to expand their connectivity mesh in order to be attractive to these large, hyperscale providers. So, I wouldn't say it's a race between European countries, but it's certainly, that's one of the decision factors in deciding where or whether to deploy. And we all know the story of what happened with Apple. What we don't want is for that to be the case with submarine cables. So there's a real issue that needs to be addressed, and addressed fairly quickly and fairly decisively by central government and the various departments responsible for the whole process.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I think to what you were mentioning earlier in terms of advances in subsea or transoceanic cable systems, not much has happened over time, except now there are transoceanic systems that are going in with much higher capacity, more fibre pairs. So, the reason I bring that up is because we have less and less chance to really get a decision and allow companies to make a call in terms of where they land cables, because capacity is going to last longer in the market. Therefore, there's going to be less opportunity for new cables to come into a specific region.
Yeah, everything's planned now, I would say, until about 2024, maybe 23. Even if you started with a standing start now, you'd be looking at 2024. So there's an opportunity for that to be perhaps the next deployment into Ireland. But again, it needs an indication that the whole ecosystem is going to be ready. There's enough broadband routes from landing areas to major conurbations. There's enough desire in government to make the process fairly straightforward about achieving that, because largely those are the decision factors from the people who are stimulating these kind of investments and builds.
Well, if anyone of influence from government is listening, we're happy to put you in touch with Nigel and
we're, as an industry and as a company and as a whole range of different parts, we have a number of different touch points where we've tried to explain that this is, important. I think it needs the process of government to just, achieve that, either through change in primary legislation or through, adjustments. I mean, cable landings were given a kind of critical infrastructure status, which means they don't necessarily have a different process, but they kind of go through the process in perhaps a different speed than others. But look, there's plenty of people working on this. I don't want to be seen overly critical, but that it really does need to be very joined up. There is no point on this earth building 1 million data centers and not having anything to connect them to, and vice versa. There's no point in throwing in a load of cables and not being able to, supply the power to the data center. So that it's a real kind of connected ecosystem that needs, focus and a good, clear strategy. And I think Peter's right. There's lots of good, clear strategies about different strata in the telecoms arena, but maybe not a holistic one that covers every single aspect. Thank
you, Nigel. Hugh, do you want to jump in with a question?
Yeah, I think you've actually answered quite a lot of these. There's a couple of specifics, and I'll read them out, and I'm sorry if I don't get them in the right order. That's my lack of knowledge. There was one from Paolo Riley, who says, is there a physical map available to identify the routes planned? That's particularly for you, Peter, in terms of where your fibres go, where the connectivity is going.
Yeah, there's not much of the country we're not covering. But there is a map where on our website where we can show the intervention area. What's the actual coverage area that the fibre network will go across? Not specifically down to routes on the network. We're still designing the low level design of the network. We have to date we've surveyed 25% of the entire country, and we're starting low level design. So we've over almost approaching 100,000 premises now that have been low leveled. We've done a low-level design that's going into a build program, and we've issued build contracts to our main subcontractors to start the build on 76,000 premises being passed. But I suppose his question is about dark fibre and the availability on that network. We've allowed capacity on the entire network for dark fibre capacity, but the way I would describe it, and it's not just our program. It goes back to the EU Commission desire in terms of what services are to be offered on state subsidized networks. We'll start off with what we call VUA and bitstream. VUA is the virtual and bundled local access. So the local connectivity tail where existing infrastructure providers can take it in regional areas, or bitstream where we bring it back to a data center, typically in Dublin from the premise. the next step of that, then typically we will offer wavelengths, whether it's 10 gig up to 100 gig wavelengths on the network. And there is a requirement in the contract at a certain point in time that we offer dark fiber on a national basis. But certainly we would be open to having conversations with anybody who's looking to buy dark fiber throughout the network. And most of the dark fiber requirements typically are going to be point to point, because if we think about the future of our network, we're building an XGS-PON network, so we're supporting 10 gig to the home day one. And because we have 227 points of handover, we're actually bringing them back to 33 regional aggregation points. So retail operators can connect in those 33 aggregation points and build their own backhaul, or we can deliver it back on a national basis. And we'll constantly bring that speed up with benchmark with other areas. So most of the operators will take an active service from us. Typically for mobile backhaul, it'll be wavelengths. It just makes sense. And then if there is demand for a dark fiber, we will deliver point to point. But I think for most operators and the infrastructure we're building today, we can virtualize networks on the infrastructure we're building. So in time, it won't be about us selling a specific dedicated bandwidth service. We could get into a position where we're selling capacity on the entire network. So an operator, no different than you're buying a computing power with AWS, an operator can come on board and effectively have a capacity slice of the network, and they can change products and services as they desire, as if the network is their network. And I think that's where I see the future of this. Dark fiber is great for certain applications, particularly data centers. Wavelengths is very good for mobile backhaul or mobile infrastructure. But then I think on a national basis, I see virtual network slices, both fixed and mobile, being the future in the next 10 to 15 years.
Thank you for that. Paul, have you got any thoughts on that?
To be honest, nothing more really than Peter's just covered.
Just Peter, just a quick question. In terms of, are you seeing the infrastructure that you're developing has stimulated any new opportunities with organizations coming to you that don't already operate in Ireland and thinking about utilizing infrastructure to deliver either a similar type of services that we're seeing today or something new?
I think probably we've seen an acceleration. Obviously, when you're, it's no different than looking at any infrastructure project. You start mapping through the risks and the opportunities and what the revenue forecast is going to look like. I think what we've seen over the last 12 months is there's been an acceleration of that. And if I look at when the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications looked at this, they did a cost-benefit analysis. And if I look at that and the expected returns, both from an enterprise and a consumer residential perspective, it looks like as if the things that they thought might happen in 5 or 10 years have been accelerated. And it's funny, as we start to connect premises today, somebody sent a note recently about from Alexander Graham Bell, where he said, someday the man at the end of the telephone will be able to see the person at the far end of it. And like nobody did video calls to the scale that we've done them in the last 6 months. So I think the last 6 to 9 months has seen a significant shift towards bandwidth. And as a result, yes, we're seeing a lot more demand. We have 33 retail operators that are signed up to start selling services to consumers and businesses. And it's far more than we would have envisaged, because the demand for bandwidth is there. I think mobile backhaul is another one, but I certainly see the opportunities growing. We have a team that have come from infrastructure, a commercial team that come from infrastructure, and also come from other wholesale and retail operators. And obviously, with their connections, we're starting to see a lot more interest in different products and services. But I think what we have to do first of all, like any infrastructure project, is get the foundations built. We've built the network to scale. We've built the infrastructure where we can accommodate innovation, but we have to get the foundations built. And then absolutely we'll start driving products and services and innovation across that network. And it'll go to everything from, connecting open RAN wireless networks. We know that base stations are going to come closer to the consumer. I would describe it almost like once we move into 5G and 6G, there's a blend between Wi-Fi and mobile access. But that's not possible without having the fibre capacity and the co-location facilities for all of the computing power behind it. So I see the future is bright for this sort of infrastructure. Innovate. Once we build the bandwidth, innovation will come in spades.
You're absolutely right, and you see local councils in Northern Ireland. You've got things like the city deals and the growth deals, where there's a lot of money going out. People are talking about smart cities, smart city networks, but without the infrastructure, you can't do that. Once the infrastructure is in place, you can start to extend that out across a whole region, which just continues to support growth. And Northern Ireland's got a good digital sector. But it's a growing digital sector, but it's very, very focused on Belfast. And it's very difficult then to compete with Dublin when you've got such proximity in Dublin and a high range of salaries there, particularly when people don't have the infrastructure locally to stay. So Northern Ireland, with great universities like Queen's, Ulster University, turning out fantastic students that are just really leaving the region. I think with growing infrastructure in a region, particularly now with a demand for people to be able to work from home, they can be supported with new infrastructure, and it gives all these skills the ability to build a local digital sector. If you want a digital sector, you need digital infrastructure and digital skills, and I think we're starting to see that now in the north.
And I think that's it's very clear. I know from talking to some of the regional stakeholders, we look at the Northwest. There's over 300,000 third level educated people that came from the Northwest, but they're living in cities. They're living in Dublin, London, the US, and abroad, and they want to come home. They want to start families, but the challenge for them is the tech jobs aren't in those regions. And I know of a number of companies in the Northwest now of Ireland that actually are starting to are using the national broadband and opportunities to bring people back and saying, look, if you want a better standard of living, you can work remotely, you can have affordable housing, better work-life balance. I think people are starting to see the opportunity, and it's probably taken this pandemic for people to recognize you don't need to be in the office to be successful or productive. And I think I know one company in particular that has 80 people in a software business in the Northwest, and they're expanding. They've got operations in the UK and the US, and they're actually doubling down on their investment in the Northwest, whereas they were considering setting up, and they have an office in Dublin, but they were considering bringing more people to the office in Dublin. They've changed their mind completely because they see the infrastructure that's being deployed, the lifestyle that they have up there. They want to bring people back to the Northwest as opposed to hiring more people in Dublin. So I think that's going to change over the next couple of years as we build out this infrastructure. I think we're going to see a significant shift in innovation and businesses evolving in regional and rural Ireland.
Yeah, and we're starting to see also within the data center sector in Northern Ireland that there's been an awful lot of on-premises kit. Lots of indigenous Northern Irish business think it's fine to have 4 or 5 racks sat in a little computer room somewhere because they like to see them, work on them. They're sitting in unmanned buildings now. So they're starting to see, well, look, maybe this should be somewhere secure, somewhere safe, somewhere with high bandwidth capabilities. But our staff have got to be able to access the application. Staff have got to be able to get hold of all of this data.
We looked at this when we started the project a number of years ago. Most telcos build everything. They want to build a network. They want to build the IT infrastructure. They want to own it. They want to be able to touch it, feel it. We made a decision to build all of our infrastructure on cloud. And it's given us massive flexibility in terms of development, in terms of testing, in terms of running parallel services and applications during that development phase. But it's also given us the ability to bring it to other regions where we can say, okay, this can be turned on anywhere, right? And I think that innovation and the ability to meet the demand, whatever it is in the future, is critical now. I don't think anybody can sit and say, I'm going to build something today and I'm good for 5 years. I think you have to build something that can meet the demands of way beyond 5 years. Nobody can sit in their laurels anymore in terms of how they operate a business. Things have changed.
I think that's a really key thing around the structure of how you build out now, is that intelligent outsourcing, if you will, where you control the strategy and maybe the IPR of stitching together component pieces is the way to go, because it lends towards this. I mean, I don't think globalization is going away, but a localization of service delivery. So, for example, we have everything in our business is remote. I mean, we literally have nothing on-prem. And in fact, during the COVID lockdown, we moved offices without even being in them. We just sent some removal people in to move all those desks and boxes and stuff and take it to a different building, and even without anybody in the office. So I think that's a burgeoning trend, particularly in telecoms, because at the end of the day, other people focus and specialize on other things, and they're very good at writing software that controls customer interaction or software that controls network interaction. And actually, it's the orchestration of it all, and the being the conductor, that bringing it all together specifically for your sector in the market, and being, always being ready to accept the innovation that they're bringing to the particular product piece that you're using, is a great way. And absolutely everything we have, apart from the cables, is virtual and in the cloud, and managed by good security but soft interfaces.
I think that circles back into the whole ecosystem again. I mean, Paul made a very good point in terms of, we see this continual shift into the cloud and moving infrastructure from a customer premise into a data center location. There's been bad press in terms of the power draw from data centers as an example, but it's a much more efficient way to really consolidate infrastructure into a single place, provide it with the most efficient power generation and cooling that's available, with the best connectivity available, everything that's needed to really operate a facility in the right way. And if off the back of that we get the generation of power correct, whether it be wind or whatever mode is developed to deliver that, then you have a really efficient ecosystem that is good for the environment and is good for the users. And that's distributed. It's not region specific. It's distributed across the island of Ireland, and then generates that work-life balance that Peter was talking about. Is there anything that risks all of this? When I picked up in terms of, obviously, bad news always gets headlines, but when the European Union privacy regulator placed a preliminary order to suspend data transfer between the US and EU users, is there anything like restrictions or regulatory restrictions that could potentially harm this successful ecosystem we have from a connectivity perspective?
Who wants to take that one? I think the question probably there is globalization versus localization. We've been on a long run of globalization, and we're obviously seeing previous administrations are focused on localization in other jurisdictions. I think this, let's keep it local, possibly. There's benefits to it, but it also has huge risks, and I think that may change how we share information, and how connectivity and data centers and the transfer of information is managed. I think that's probably the biggest risk I would see, and obviously Nigel and Paul would maybe be more familiar with it outside of Ireland's perspective.
I think there's an interesting one here. I think. You could argue that sort of poorly enacted legislation, can really mess things up in an industry if it's not, cognizant of what really happens. And I do have this, worry that if you just look at some of the congressional questioning of some of the internet content players and the quality of the questions, the basic nature of a gross misunderstanding of what some of these organizations do. If you follow that through in most legislatures, and I'm not saying that everybody has this almost inattention to the real detail of what happens, but if you were to say today, let's say, publish a piece of legislation that said no data could move from one country to another, it wouldn't take very long to get that reversed. As literally the entire fabric and ecosystem of that country falls apart. no banking, no, never mind anything else, no tactical activities, even using software that might be in a different country to run, criminal, management systems, or, even the legislature itself. I mean, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding of people of how connected things already are. And something like GDPR looking at personal data, okay, that's fine. That's if there's an EU citizenship requirement not to move personal data. But again, these things will always come with fairly high level risks, I think. And there's always as well an interesting flick between public and private. And many of the large companies that are moving data around are considering that they're doing it under a shield because it's inside of a private network. So Privacy Shield in the US and how it interrelates with GDPR, all of that needs to be, reviewed and looked at and made to work. But I think there's a strong note of caution that, be careful what you change, because there'll be equal, amount of negative reaction to perhaps any positive reaction.
Yeah, I'm amazed that we've managed to get this far in a Brexit environment and things like GDPR and Privacy Shield without it being resolved. And if you look even just on the island of Ireland, if you talk about post-Brexit transfer of goods between the north and the south, they're talking about pigs and cows. They're not talking about data. And yet data is part of the lifeblood of the island of Ireland, and its interaction with America is vital. Just chatting with a US company a couple of days ago, they're taking it so seriously that they're looking not just at the UK's exit, they're considering how Europe or the EU might break up, and they're actually structuring their European data in a way that they can separate it off on a per country basis if they need to. And this is all based on the fact that legislation's not sorted.
Just on that, yesterday, and it's now part of our on-demand content, there was a panel discussion on Brexit by lawyers, and it's if you've got an hour and a half, go and listen to it. It's got some quite frightening statements in there about the lack of planning, the lack of legislation, and even small things like within your terms and your service level agreements are probably regional specific. Well, in the 31st of December, we're no longer UK, and I'm a UK citizen. We're no longer part of Europe, and those terms and conditions don't apply. If you have an hour and a half, go and listen to it. It's fascinating. Can I just bring you back to a couple of other specific questions that have been raised? And I know Nigel addressed some of this. I don't know whether he addressed all of it. There's one here from Tim Anker saying, what happens to the old CLSs? I assume that means cables. And there's another one from David Parkinson on what is the latest status on building the fibre from Ireland to France? Throw that out there.
Yeah, I mean, the first one I tried to include in the discussion. I mean, TAP 14 as a cable has declared that it will turn off. Actually, the cable that we had just made live across the Atlantic from New Jersey to Denmark is going to be available in that old building. The old buildings tend to be owned by the carrier who landed the cable previously, with some refurbishment and perhaps in the case of ours, the addition of a modular specific building to house the power feeding equipment next door. Then they can be reused as connection points. So that building in Denmark is the home to a number of cables, or the traffic from a number of cables, shall we say. Almost every cable that's approaching 20 years now has probably got a runway of a few years left, and that few could be 1 or 2, or it could be 5. And it's hard to sort of say when a cable would be turned off. It's not that they'll stop working. It's just that economically, the amount of capacity carried over the cable for the fixed cost of operating it will be 100 times less, for example, than a more modern cable. That then creates a cost inequality of the operating cost, and starts to eat into the margin. So you'll see, there's some cables that I was part of building 1999, 2001, and then operating them. Things like the GCX cables, they can make a case that the cable will continue for a long time. But I think practical economies would mean that you'd transfer traffic off it well before anything like its actual contracted life. And the contracts that were set up for cables like that typically have a 25-year backhaul life and a 25-year cable lease, building lease life, and the licenses are 25 to 30 years. And sure, you could spend a lot of money and extend them all, but whether that's commercially appropriate or not is obviously for them to decide. But in most regions of the world, the typical economic life of a cable is around about a 20-year mark. Some of them on less dense routes, some of the thinner routes in Asia particularly, it could extend out longer than that. So pretty much all those cables will be looking to what's their next, what are they going to do to replace themselves, and as every cable does.
And I think with sorry, Hugh.
Sorry, is there any update on the Island France bit? This is where I wouldn't know industry knowledge like this.
Yeah, I'll take that. So Island France is one of our projects in development. I think it goes back to looking at different optionality in terms of connectivity out of the island of Ireland, more on the short hops into either the UK or France in this situation. And the reality, it kind of is interlinked in terms of the drivers for these types of projects. As Nigel obviously mentioned earlier, there are a number of new cables that have recently and going into service across the Irish Sea. So in terms of available capacity, then there's a number of options and choices out there for consumers to utilize. Island France, slightly different proposition. All cables at the moment from Ireland into Europe go via the UK. So it really interlinks in terms of the discussion around Brexit and really what is the driver for this project. And to date, the design from a terrestrial and subsea perspective is engineered and ready to go. It's really about demand. And once there's some certainty in terms of back to the discussion around the actual flow of data between jurisdictions, then we'll see whether there's enough demand to de-risk the capital investment on that particular project. So it's still in development. We're yet to pull the trigger on it until we have the final viable option from a commercial perspective to do so. I don't think have we got any other questions coming in?
Not pending at the moment. I can't see anyone typing at the moment. So hopefully that means we've answered most of them. So
thanks everyone. I suppose just parting shots. If anybody's got any questions from an audience perspective, please throw them in now before we finish up. I suppose just if we just go around the table, as it were. Paul, is any kind of parting shots, any future crystal ball thoughts in terms of Northern Ireland and the burgeoning opportunity of independent data centers and innovation in your region?
Well, I hope so, and there's a number of drivers. If you look really since the time that we got our data center live, we've managed to be caught first by Brexit and second by COVID. So there's not been too helpful events for us there. But let's clear those out of the way. We've suddenly got a region which will probably have the best broadband capability of any region in the UK, sitting on the border of the EU, with Dublin, with its massive data center industry, with those massive hyperscalers sitting just over the road. It's tantalizingly close to think that they can take advantage of just popping over the border and start to grow things that actually don't sit within region. If you're in Northern Ireland, things you might take for granted, like say a Zoom call or a Teams call, or you want to look at Netflix or BBC iPlayer or buy something from Amazon. Sorry to use all the brand names, or you want to go to the public cloud. Not one piece of that is located in Northern Ireland. You're always looking at London, Slough, you're looking at Dublin for it. And I think there's got to be a driver that changes that. I think there's this sort of latent demand for it. There's a lot of people say there's a growing tech sector. The cybersecurity sector in Northern Ireland is world leading. Health and life sciences, all of these things are building, and I don't think it will take much to draw larger organisations to see Northern Ireland for what it is and the opportunity to sit in that region. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Paul. Peter, once you've got Ireland cracked, any international aspirations, or is this the focus to get it done, get it right, and then operate it for the future?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to industrialize what we're doing. It's of significant scale. So, and we're getting there. We'll be in steady state in the coming months, where we're passing between 7,000 and 10,000 homes. It doesn't sound like a lot, but when you think about the distance between each home in rural Ireland, it's quite a significant amount of infrastructure we're deploying. I think, I suppose for the audience we have here, it's about, Ireland is very much open for business. And I think, to Paul's point, Northern Ireland and the Republic, in terms of working together, the benefits that we have to take. We look at Brexit, whilst we can look at the negatives of Brexit, we have to look as an industry, how do we support the UK, Ireland, and the rest of Europe in that regard. I think as an island, having full fibre connectivity is a critical step in that process. And I think that'll drive, that connectivity and bandwidth will drive applications and services and drive industries, both data center and tech industries, into the north and into the south. So I do think there's massive opportunities in terms of our global ambitions. I think we've got a unique set of shareholders in Granahan McCourt. It's very much a global telecoms experience, and David McCourt himself has led telecoms operations previously in Europe, but also in South America and North America. I think what we need to do is we're taking this model of long-term development, looking at wholesale infrastructure, looking for open access, and Ireland is unique in that regard, in that we have some of the biggest telecom players and tech players in the world in Ireland. So if we prove it here in Ireland, there's no reason why we can't go to other areas in Europe and actually take those relationships and those interfaces. We think about working together. It's not just about people, it's about systems, it's about processes, it's about the APIs, it's about interconnects. And I think if we prove it in Ireland and we have all of those interfaces and interconnects from at an operations and systems level, it's a lot easier to have those conversations when we look at other parts of Europe. And I think that's the one biggest opportunity that Ireland has, I think, in Europe, is that we hold a lot of those interfaces today in Ireland. We need to leverage it more across Europe in terms of bringing network, data centers, applications and services to Europe. We're in a unique situation and we need to maximize that.
Thank you, Peter, and good luck with the continued rollout of the network. Nigel, we just had a message from the Taoiseach. He said he's going to give you a call. I've given him your mobile number. He's going to pave the way for you for all future transatlantic cable systems. So some goods come out of today for you. Wonderful.
Just whilst we've been talking that, by the way, which Taoiseach? Anyway, we've just had one question in. How does the panel see data center zones expanding? And does the panel think that these will expand beyond Dublin, so Arklow, Cork, or other areas?
Well, if you're part of any of the Host in Ireland community, Gary Connolly always chuckles when he talks about Cork and the Cork Internet Exchange, saying it's the only profitable data centre outside Dublin. So, but at least it's proven that can be done, and that CIX model is similar to our own, that it's located at the cable landing station for transatlantic connectivity. So for us, that gives that gives some not hope, but it's some confidence in what we've built. If we look at ourselves as a zone outside of Dublin, then it's working for us. We're bringing high quality data center services to a new community that couldn't or wouldn't use Dublin. There are a number of Northern Irish businesses who are utilising data centre services on the mainland and in Dublin, but they would prefer to have it local, and we've given them that opportunity. We're not the only data centre operator in Northern Ireland, and there have been some announcement recently of one or two other quite large scale capabilities that I think will sit waiting for anchor tenants before anything's announced there. So, Northern Ireland is looking at quite a regional way of operating with data centers. And again, the connectivity is getting there to enable that.
Yeah, I think today's conversation has proved the infrastructure is there or will be coming. I think back to the earlier discussion in terms of, what a data center looks like. Is it going to be slightly different to the traditional facilities that we see today, or is it more in terms of smaller units that are more distributed to deliver service closer to the users? So, I think it depends on what the data is versus where a data center is physically located. I think everything underpinning it is there or will be there. I think it depends on the application and what is needed to wrap around that to facilitate an application or a user experience upon it. Nigel, any just from your side, parting shots, anything delivering cables in every country around the world? Is there any wise shots that to leave with the audience?
From the day I took this job, I was excited about the fact that the predominant feature here was Ireland, because it is geographically the best place to land a cable that needs to access the rest of the mainland. It has a shorter continental shelf. Technical for most people, but that means less shallow water. And less shallow water is very good in terms of resilience and reliability of a cable asset in the water. So it's physically and geophysically, in the right place. It's economically and, ecosystemly in the right place. And it's a great opportunity. I think there's lots of things being done in legislation and in government to try and make it easier and to open arms to connectivity. And that's all great, but a focus still needs to remain upon that and not get lost in all of the other development activities. Wind farms being a fairly clear one of them, because whether people realize it or not, essentially a wind farm will sterilize parts of the coastline to being accessible for a cable landing.
Thank you. I think with that, I'd like to thank firstly the audience. If it wasn't for you, then there would be no point having these types of sessions, but equally to thank Paul, Peter, Nigel, and obviously Hugh for organising. Thanks for your time today, appreciate it, and hopefully we'll be able to meet in person soon to continue these themes of discussion. But until then, thank you very much, everybody.
Yes, on behalf of Data Centers Ireland and the team, thank you all. And this will be available for on-demand content probably by the end of tomorrow. So thank you all, and hopefully see you at Data Centers Ireland next year.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks all.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.